Good afternoon, everyone. This is LA State, a political news show covering local and state issues affecting Cal State LA students. I am your host, Joe Brizzolara. My co-host today is Malerie Wilkins.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, all right. Today's topic is the changing economic landscape of Boyle Heights.
Gentrification,
that's right. Everyone's talking about it. Recently, protests have popped up all over the city as residents fight against an influx of trendy coffee shops and fine art galleries that threaten to enforce the continuing rise of rent prices.
We're going to look at some reports and talk to some of the involved parties and try to give you an understanding of what this change has meant on the ground.
Yeah, we're also going to going to give you some background as to what gentrification is and how things like rent control play into the equation.
First, let's look at some background on the show for new listeners.
Yeah, so LA State is a show produced by Cal State LA students for Cal State LA students. We'll be covering issues like today's topic, issues that affect us on a local and a state level. Some examples will be legislation being debated in Sacramento, controversial ordinances being passed on the city level, and social and cultural shifts in the region. We'll make sure to give our listeners general background on political terms and concepts. And the show will include reporting from the field as well as live interviews and call-ins.
So thanks for tuning in. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Golden Eagle Radio.
Keyboard Cat, Hamilton the Pug, and Toast Meets World. These are some of the internet's most beloved pets. And they all have one thing in common. Their stories started in a shelter. Start your story. Adopt a dog or cat today. Visit theshelterpetproject.org to find a pet near you. Training that pet to play the keyboard, that's optional. Start a story. Adopt a shelter or rescue pet today. Brought to you by Maddie's Fund, the Humane Society of the United States, and the Ad Council.
And we're back. The show is LA State. The station is Golden Eagle Radio. Today we're talking about gentrification in Boyle Heights.
Yeah, so Mallory, you're actually a resident in Boyle Heights. What has your experience been like?
Well, I've lived there for 2 years, and within those 2 years, I have seen a lot of change.
It's a predominantly Latino neighborhood, correct?
Yes. Boyle Heights is a district of the city of Los Angeles. It's to the east of downtown. The district is over 100 years old and was originally a historic Jewish neighborhood before becoming a predominantly Latino neighborhood.
Right.
What is gentrification?
Yeah, so gentrification is a process where working class neighborhoods kind of receive like an influx of more affluent residents. The area becomes more desirable, developers come in and create more expensive housing, and fashionable businesses open up. This drives the market value of housing up, which in turn displaces low-income residents who had lived there previous to the change. It's a hot topic in Los Angeles where we've seen multiple districts and neighborhoods undergo this process. Silver Lake, Highland Park, and the Arts Districts are all prime examples of once low-income, high-crime areas becoming hipster enclaves with pricey apartments and high-end commerce. So the issue is largely about housing. And a lot of people would say, well, doesn't the city have rent control, which would protect long-time low-income residents from being priced out? And that's kind of a qualified answer, yes and no. Los Angeles' rent stabilization ordinance, or rent control as it's more commonly known, generally only applies to multi-unit buildings constructed on or before October 1st, 1978. These buildings include apartments, condos, duplexes, 2 or more single-family dwelling units on the same land. There are around 631,000 units in 118,000 properties throughout the city that fall under this ordinance.
So what's the situation in Boyle Heights?
So Boyle Heights is going through this process and has seen a sharp increase in rent prices. Recently, a gathering was held in Mariachi Plaza to protest some of these rent increases. Mariachis frequent the plaza, waiting for employment, waiting for people to hire them for their services, and they're actually being priced out of the apartments that they live in that are a few blocks away from the plaza. Curbed LA reported that these musicians have been seeing increases in their rent that range from about 60 to 80%. The protest was organized by Unión de Vecinos, a neighborhood organization that advocates for low-income communities. They're currently waging a rent strike. Residents have been refusing to pay rent with the hope that landlords will negotiate less dramatic rent increases. The protests have been getting a lot of attention, the protests that have been getting the most have been the ones that have been outside of coffee shops and art galleries. Recently, Weird Wave Coffee Shop near the corner of Soto and Cesar Chavez has been hit with protesters who see the coffee shop as the epitome of the hipster takeover. Protests began the day it opened, which was like a little bit more than a month ago, and now they're outside every Saturday morning at around 9 a.m. The galleries on Anderson Street have also become huge targets. These protesters have gotten pretty heated with anti-gentrification forces using militant tactics to push newcomers out. They've called out Mexican patrons for being sellouts and contributing to a white takeover of the neighborhood. One gallery was stormed by protesters who threw detergent on people attending an opening and spray-painted F white art. Words such as colonist, collaborator, and coconut are commonly lobbed. Colonist refers to urban colonization, which is the way that anti-gentrification protesters like to phrase this process. Basically, it's affluent outsiders come in and occupy the neighborhood, displacing previous residents in the process, similar to a way a colonizing force will come into a country and take it over and occupy it. Coconut refers to a Mexican American who has disavowed his heritage in favor of fitting into white society, brown on the outside and white on the inside. Property values for Boyle Heights have been on the rise for years. According to research done by the LA Weekly, the value of a single-family home has increased 35% over the past 3 years. Currently, the median value of a single-family home in Boyle Heights is $216,000, less than the LA County in general. Given its closeness to downtown and its relative low cost, this trend is expected to continue to rise. Stories of rent increases have been reported by many news outlets. Rent jumps of 100% over the course of a few years are not uncommon. Development of city services has made the district more desirable. The Metro Gold Line opened to Boyle Heights in 2009, offering direct access to downtown. Another line is slated to be completed in 2020. The freeways that crisscross the district offer access to future residents. It was these same freeways, actually, interestingly enough, and somewhat ironically, that actually spurred the original exodus of middle-class white residents from Boyle Heights in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. With the income of the new freeway systems, the property values dropped. This allowed for lower-income Hispanic people to move in because they could afford the cheaper housing.
So who are some of the other groups protesting in Boyle Heights?
Yeah, so there are many organizations involved in these protests. Defend Boyle Heights, or DBH, and Boyle Heights Against Art Washing and Displacement, or BAD, are two coalitions that are heavily involved. They are composed of several independent groups that have different and often overlapping focuses. DBH has received a lot of attention. They're really hardline on this issue and do not endorse any cooperation or collaboration with businesses and organizations they see as being the forces of gentrification. On their Facebook page, they describe themselves as an anti-gentrification coalition devoted to community and our hood. To give you a better feel for their perspective, here's a quote from their blog that was directed at artists in and out of Boyle Heights. Quote, "Align yourself with the most marginalized of Boyle Heights. Ask yourself, are you serving the people? Are you defending Boyle Heights? Is your art? There is room on this side for artists who prioritize the larger community over their pocket. For those of you in the institutionalized art world, in the halls of art school, focus on preventing the germination of gentrification, which is sown into graduating artists. Combat the culture of capitalism. Combat the professors or fellow students who plan to move into Boyle Heights, East LA, Echo Park, Lincoln Heights, Compton, South Central, Cypress Park, and elsewhere. Convince them, your peers, that their vision of art and artistry is not more important than the economic survivability of working class people of color in those communities. And if you can't convince them, let them know we will be waiting unmercifully.
So you mentioned the term art washing. Can you tell us what this is?
Art washing is a term that's being used by a lot of the anti-gentrification activists. It refers to the stage of gentrification where artists move into a formerly disinvested area to open galleries and studios, thereby making the area more desirable for developers and ripe for displacement. Artists, activists claim, see themselves as urban pioneers that are bringing culture to former wastelands. In reality, they argue these artists are actually erasing the culture that had existed previous to their arrival. Art washing also relates to urban beautification efforts by cities and businesses that make the landscape more desirable to affluent investors.
Have the protests had an effect?
The protest and aversion tactics of the activists have had mixed results. Some investors have been discouraged from investing in the area, weary of community opposition to development. PSSST, an art gallery on Anderson, recently shut down amid constant protest. On their website, they stated, the ongoing controversy surrounding art and gentrification in Boyle Heights caused PSSST to become so contested that we are unable to ethically and financially proceed with our mission. Our young nonprofit struggled to survive through constant attacks. Our staff and artists were routinely trolled online and harassed in person. This persistent targeting, which was often highly personal in nature, was made all the more intolerable because the artists we are engaged are queer, women, and or people of color. We could no longer continue to put already vulnerable communities at further risk. DBH has claimed that the PSST gallery was not integrated in the community and was simply another outpost for affluent outsiders. They claimed its closing as a victory. So we're going to come back after this break, and we're going to talk to some of the involved parties in this battle going on in Boyle Heights. The station is Golden Eagle Radio. The show is LA State. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, there's an event coming up in August on the 17th, and it's a university convocation at the Luckman Theater. President Covina will open the new academic year, and the program will include the introduction of new faculty, the announcement of the Outstanding Professor Awards, and the president's remarks outlining his goals and priorities for the university.
Sounds fun.
Hope to see you guys there. Hello, welcome back to LA State. I'm Malerie Wilkins, and you're listening to Cal State LA's Golden Eagle Radio. My co-host today is Joe Brizzolara. So, Joe, you got a chance to speak with one of the owners of Weird Wave Coffee. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, Weird Wave is one of the focal points for protests going on in Boyle Heights. Protests began the day it opened a little bit over a month ago. The protest signs have said things like white coffee and Americano to go. Americano spelled with KKK in reference to the perceived white supremacy of the establishment. There have been reports of property destruction. When I went in, an LAPD officer was there checking in on a reported broken window. Jackson Defa, one of the owners, said that the security cameras showed a masked man throwing a brick through it. There's no evidence that this person was in any way affiliated with any of the groups officially protesting the cafe, but the reasons for the vandalism are most likely gentrification.
Has there been any fallout as far as customers?
No, not really. The owner told me that, in fact, they've seen an increase in business as a result of the media attention the protesters have brought them. When I was there, they actually had run out of the drip coffee because the day had been busier than was expected. So I asked him, Jackson, why he and his partners decided to open up in Boyle Heights and what the neighborhood reaction was, excluding the protesters themselves. So this is what he had to say.
We came to this spot because, for a variety of reasons, but primarily because there's just no coffee shop here.
Yeah.
And we thought, well, this community needs a coffee shop. We did some research into Boyle Heights, and like I learned that it used to be the most diverse place in the country. So I was like, oh, that's super cool. You know, I knew that there was a certain like protest mentality to certain aspects of the community, but you know, we're not like snobby people trying to sell art. We're just down to earth dudes trying to sell copies. So we kind of maybe underestimated the backlash a little bit. I guess my philosophy in life is like, just be a good person. You know, you're gonna be fine. People are gonna like you because there's not enough good people in the world. You know.
Right.
And so I felt like I underestimated just how much these protesters were not going to take that into account.
Yeah. What have you seen from the other people, not the protesters, but other people in the community? What have their reactions
been? The community has been overwhelmingly supportive.
Yeah.
To a point where I feel humbled. I mean, really, truly, we're so busy we can't keep up here because the community has come out and said loudly and proudly that they want a coffee shop here. Feel accepted in every way.
Right.
We were in here for about 5 months doing the build out and the construction, and nobody harassed us. We met everyone. We went out of our way to get to know everyone because we're the new guys on the block, and we introduced ourselves up and down the street, and everyone was so warm and kind and encouraging and helpful. People bring us lunches and bring us, you know, if we need a tool or whatever, you know, like community, real community style. Wow. You know. So these protesters, I don't know where they're from, but they're not from around here because, you know, we have 5 months here without any problems.
I also asked him about the claims that some of the protesters have made, which is that this business is part of a movement that's displacing long-time low-income residents.
I mean, I'm not personally in favor of that. We didn't displace anyone when we moved into this spot. This building was vacant for 9 months before we rented it to start our business. Like, you know, I just flatly think that's not true.
I asked how he thought that his business was benefiting Boyle Heights.
Well, we do a lot of things to benefit this community. We hire a local kid, like we were just talking about, Lewis. See you, Calvin. Take care, man.
You guys are doing Homeboy, right?
We partner with Homeboys, so we get our pastries from them. We actually get a few of our pastries from an even more local bakery on 4th Street, called La Suranita.
4th and Reed?
What's that?
Is that the one on 4th and Reed?
Yeah.
The bakery?
Yeah, La Suranita.
Yeah.
This place is great, man. He's a very talented baker.
They've always been known for you.
Yeah. So, yeah, what up? We buy almost all our produce locally. We buy our strawberries from a vendor locally. We buy our avocados from a guy who pushes a car up the street. We have a barista training program for kids who want to learn about barista skills from Boyle Heights, so they can go out into any shop in the city and get a job, get paid really well. I mean, the list goes on. You know, I don't want to like get into plating about giving the homeless people food and stuff because I don't want to make those people a political part of this whole thing.
Finally, I wanted to know what his message was to the protesters.
Dude, I would say this. Check it out. I lived in San Francisco for 4 years. I got pushed out of the city from gentrification. I know what you're feeling and going through, but if you can't even sit down and have a conversation and look me in the eye and talk like an adult, what do you really expect to get out of protesting? When you protest, it's because you have something to say that no one's listening to. That's what protesting is for. That's our tradition of protesting in this country. So you guys have had your protest. We're all listening.
All right, so we'll be back right after this with an interview with one of the protesters of Weird Wave Coffee.
You're listening to Golden Eagle Radio.
People been saying to your friend, get a different face, and posting on their feed, they're super ugly. The things they say to them online are cruel and they're not true. So tell your friend, I'll stand up for you. Don't worry, I know what to do.
Know someone being bullied online? You can be a witness and make a difference by letting the world know it isn't cool and by letting your friend know you care. Learn more at eyewitnessbullying.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
And we're back. The station is Golden Eagle Radio. The show is LA State, bringing you local and state political issues affecting students here at Cal State LA. We're talking about the battle over gentrification being fought in Boyle Heights.
We just heard from Jackson Defa, owner of Weird Wave Coffee. Joe, you got a chance to talk with one of the protesters of Weird Wave. What did they have to say?
Yeah, so I spoke with Walter Senterfitt, a member of the Los Angeles Tenants Union and Union de Vecinos. He has protested outside of Weird Wave and is an active anti-gentrifier in the community. We spoke at his home in Boyle Heights. I asked him why coffee shops and art galleries have been targeted by protesters.
Well, the galleries are pretty straightforward. The galleries have been moving into the areas that are very close to the public housing projects, Pico Elisa, who have a long history of fighting to defend their homes against demolition. And then ultimately they lost the fight. The projects were demolished, which was the largest public housing projects west of the Mississippi took place in Boyle Heights, and over 1,000 families lost their homes. And this is some of the only housing for the most poor people, because it's housing that depends solely on your income, so that people only pay a certain percentage of their income. So they ended up demolishing 1,000 units and only rebuilding 300. But those same people that fought were the ones often that came back. And they fought for the right to have a safe neighborhood. They fought to figure out how to live with and then to diminish gang violence. They fought for jobs. Those factories, the galleries along Anderson, some of them were factories that didn't hire people from the community. These same people fought to get those factories to hire the youth, to do job training programs, and to make these neighborhoods safe. Now the galleries have come in because the land is relatively cheap. They can buy it and in the long term flip it for much more rent. In the meantime, they can operate their galleries cheaply. But it's very close to the neighborhood, but it has no intention of serving the people who live here. It's for people from the west side. It's people who are wealthy arts collectors. It's for upper middle class, arts-oriented people. And when they come in, not only are they bringing their aesthetic into the neighborhood, they're running shows, they're wanting to then have other things like brew pubs and bars and cafes and coffee shops that serve the people not from the community, but people who are coming to patronize the art galleries. So, and with the 6th Street Bridge demolition and redevelopment and the attempt to expand the arts district from the west side of the river to the east side, all of these things are a part of a process that actually immediately displaces the kind of cultural heritage of Boyle Heights, but it's setting the stage for displacing people physically by raising rents, by raising property values, by putting more pressure on more landlords of housing that is affordable now for people to flip the current tenants out and remodel or sell it to people that will appeal to the demographic that's coming in for the art galleries. So we're saying gentrification is basically an economic-driven process to displace poor people, working class people, and replace them with higher income, upper middle class people. And often it involves displacing people of color and replacing them with white people, because all parts of capitalism in the US are necessarily racialized. But it's a process, essentially, I would say gentrification comes down to displacement with replacement for profit. We're saying that, however, gentrification is a man-made process, so a human-made process, so it can be stopped by collective human action. It's not inevitable. And one of the ways you stop it, even though the galleries aren't the only thrust, it's the real estate development and the flipping and development that's even more fundamental underneath. The galleries are an integral part of it for this art washing and arts-oriented development. So we protest them because of all of these different reasons. One is they're displacing spaces that could be used for something the community really needs. The community has said, when we have meetings, you talk to people, we don't need art galleries, we need laundromats, we need affordable supermarkets, we need community training spaces for youth, We need community meeting spaces. We need businesses that respond to the needs we have and that respect the culture and the fact that this is a working class, primarily Latino community. So all of these reasons are why I've protested the galleries, why we and the LA Tenants Union have protested the galleries. And we think that if we make them unwelcome and make their clients unwelcome, we can help get them to leave, which is what our demand. People say, well, what would you rather have instead? We said, we got a lot of ideas. Like I said, we want laundromats. We want youth centers. We want supportive housing for homeless people. We want affordable, accessible supermarkets.
Right. And so the cafes work similar.
The cafe works in a similar way.
Yeah.
A particular cafe may not have a great deal of social and economic weight like this one, but it is very much both a marker of and can then lead to more coming in. Realtors market to the new displacing, gentrifying demographic by saying, see, we've got amenities that you will like.
Yeah.
We've got coffee shops. We've got little boutique restaurants. We've got art galleries.
You see cafes as a catalyst for
Cafes are a catalyst and a marker and a stimulus for further attraction of people that will make the market for displacement.
What do you make of the divisive and often intense language being used by the protesters?
People are angry. I mean, I'm only accountable for my own language ultimately.
Sure.
But you know, people who gentrification is violence. It is violence in a very profound sense. It is uprooting people from their homes. It uproots people from their communities. It uproots and destroys and disperses communities. It ends up creating homelessness. It ends up creating dispersion of families. It ends up creating other kinds of social issues and problems because people's natural support systems and ways of getting along with each other are destroyed. In that sense, it's fundamentally violent. So people are angry about that happening, and they use language that is very reflective of that anger and the reality of what the gentrification is and stands for. And then when people who are complicit in gentrification in one of the many ways in which it exposes itself, deny that or justify it, that of course gins up more anger. So I would say, you know, whatever kind of language that's strong and fierce and determined and militant that comes up is a reflective of that. And I think it's also a reflection of the determination that we're going to fight to resist this. A lot of people say, oh, there's nothing you can do about it. Change is inevitable. Change is going to happen. Or we want new things to happen in our community. Well, there's nothing wrong with having new things in the community as long as the community has decided this is what it wants and chosen and created and built, as long as the new things are.
Some might say that the language and hostility is actually counterproductive to your cause. What do you say to that?
Some people are going to react against any kind of anger and militant and angry language, and some people are going to be turned off by that. I think that DBH and none of its member organizations are engaged in the vandalism. I don't know who does that. Some of it's a little suspicious. Sometimes that is even done by people who are doing gentrification in a way, in order to get extra, support and sympathy for themselves. I have no evidence that that's the case. But all I'm saying is that people have always used fears about so-called violence or vandalism or so-called strong language against forces that are fighting for social change that are resisting displacement or oppression. And I would say in the long run, none of that is what hurts a cause. What hurts a cause is the fact that these people have the power to displace and disrupt our community. And we have to build countervailing power, which the way we're doing it is by building support, by showing that we can take action, by showing that we have growing forces of people that want to resist. And several people talked to me when I was doing the picketing outside Weird Wave and said, wow, I'm glad somebody's finally standing up so that our community doesn't have to become like Echo Park, Silver Lake, Highland Park, where these kinds of businesses came in as a part of displacing people from their homes. Some other people said, wow, you mean there's something we can do about this?
If I can pose a hypothetical here, say I was the owner of Weird Wave Coffee and I was sitting right next to you here. What would you say to me?
Close your business and move.
And we'll be back after this. This is LA State, and you're listening to Golden Eagle Radio.
Music has never had a bigger place in our lives. To have access to nearly all the music in the world at our fingertips is remarkable. And yet, there needs to be a place where artists and fans can discover one another. Where the entire experience, from playlists to radio to new releases, is powered by people who live and breathe music. A place that brings you the artists you love, as well as the artists you're about to love. That kind of place would be pretty great. And that's what we set out to do with Apple Music.
All right, Mallory, well, our time is up for today. We'll have to end it there. We're going to come back next week with a new episode. Thanks to our engineer, Gecia Bell. This episode was produced by Joe Brizzolara, Malerie Wilkins, and Eron Franklin. It was written by Joe Brizzolara and Diego Barrera. Music by Ryan Sutera and Doug Van Rennen. Thanks, guys. And I'd like to thank our guests, Jackson Defa of Weird Wave Coffee and Walt Senterfitt of Los Angeles Tenants Union. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
This is LA State, real media for real students.
You're listening to Golden Eagle Radio.